welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Power Virtual Agents and how we can go ahead and bundle up our bot and all of the related assets into a solution package so that we can move it from a dev environment to a test environment to a production environment. So with that said, let's go and let's dive right into the content. So let's talk a little bit about why this content is important. So solutions in the Power Platform are nothing new. This is a capability that's existed for probably about, 18 months inside of the Power Platform. And if you go back to Dynamics, even longer than that. So it's definitely not a new concept. And really the goal is so that you can package up all of these related assets and then transport them from one environment to another environment. So now we do have support for Power Virtual Agents. This was just recently announced by Microsoft. It is something that is in preview, so do demonstrate some caution when using these capabilities, just something to be aware of as well. And so what's important about this is now we've got alignment or symmetry across the rest of the Power Platform, where we can now include Power Virtual Agents as part of a solution package. Now, it doesn't have to be just a Power Virtual Agent. It can participate in broader sets of solutions that include other assets like flows and entities and things of that nature. Now, what is interesting with this is that since this was introduced, there were some changes made in the product to actually support these capabilities. As a result, there were some schema changes, so schema in the underlying CDS platform where all of this configuration is stored to go ahead and accommodate solutions. So now, if you've created a bot prior to June 2020, you're going to have to go through an upgrade experience. And I'm going to show you some screenshots and share some of my experiences as I went through that prior to building out this solution and testing it. So that is something to be aware of. If you've just created a bot new inside of June 2020 or after June 1st, 2020, you will not have to go through this upgrade experience because your bot will already include this underlying schema. So just be aware of that. And so you'll be able to sort of skip ahead, and still there'll be content in this video that is applicable in terms of how you go ahead and export your bot as a solution and then go ahead and subsequently import it as well. Now, this is part one of a two-part series. In the next video, I'm going to share how we can automate the transport of our solution from a dev to a test to a prod environment using Azure DevOps and the Power Platform build tools that were recently released that help facilitate that. But look for that in part two of this two-part series. Before we dive deeper into the content, I wanted to let you know about an emerging community found at serverlessnotes.com. This is a community resource that covers best practices, tips, and latest announcements built on contributions by technology enthusiasts from around the globe. On serverlessnotes.com, you'll find content related to Power Automate, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Service Bus, Azure Functions, and much, much more. Serverlessnotes.com is brought to you by Serverless 360, a portal that is focused on operations and support for Microsoft Azure serverless resources. Now, this is a complementary tool to the Azure portal, and it helps organizations in supporting Azure serverless applications. You can find out more about Serverless 360 at serverless360.com. So here we have a screenshot of the documentation provided by Microsoft. As you can see, it was originally published on June 1st, so it's relatively new. And it walks you through the process of getting your bot ready for solutions, but then actually going ahead and executing on that. So here's a link. I will include it in the description of the video. It is worth checking out. Certainly if you do have some questions about how things work and why things work the way they do, it is a good reference. And so I just wanted to share that link with you. Now, we talked a little bit about this before in the intro. If you've got a bot that was built before June 2020, you need to upgrade them in order to go ahead and export them. Newly created bots don't require an upgrade. So here's how you would go about and perform that upgrade. So you would click on the gear inside of Power Virtual Agents, you'd click on General Settings, and then if you need to go ahead and upgrade your bot, you're going to get prompted to go ahead and do this. Now, when you click on this, it should take, it says about 10 minutes. In my experience, it took a little bit longer, it took about 15 minutes. And how you go ahead and can receive updates is you can X out of the experience, then go ahead and hit refresh in your browser, then go back and revisit it. And that is how you can tell whether or not your bot has been successfully upgraded. Now, in this case, what I'm going to show you today, it's not a super complex bot, but it does include a Power Automate flow. And so that was something I did want to go ahead and experience just to see how it would work with flow and including Power Automate flow. There are some caveats that you should be looking out for, especially if you have a bot framework skill, and perhaps that could be another upcoming video where I show that experience as well, because there is some things you need to do with referring to the manifest file as well. So do take a look at the documentation for more information on how to deal with that. Same thing with security is another situation. You have to sort of manage that separately outside of the process. Now, this is the experience I talked about before. You can go ahead and sort of X out from this experience, hit refresh if you do want to go ahead and see the status update itself. Like I said, in my case, it took about 15 minutes, but if you do find that it is still taking a long time, you can go ahead and use the help and support feature to reach out to Microsoft itself. While this was going on, my bot continued to function, so that wasn't sort of an issue, just in case you are curious. But definitely go and do this in your non-production environments first, before you go ahead and make changes in production, just to ensure that the experience is going to be successful for you. Once your upgrade is complete, you're going to go ahead and you will see this experience where now you're in a position to go ahead and export and import your bot. And what you do is you're going to get transitioned over to the Power Apps Solution Explorer, and we'll certainly cover that in the demo itself. Now, here's some important considerations that I want to just save you some time. What I ran into, and this is why they call it out, so it's important to read the documentation, is that naturally we're going to have our existing starting point, the environment where we originally created our bot. And we're going to want to move it to a different environment. Now, that other environment needs to have a bot created in it in order for this export import capability to work. There's some dependencies there. So do go ahead, if you're going to sort of experiment with this and you're creating yourself a new Power Platform environment, go ahead and create a bot. Just go ahead and just sort of give it a name, click start, it'll go ahead and provision the bot, and it's going to include the system topics plus those sample topics that allow you to sort of kick the tire on a bot. That's all you need to do. You don't need to go into sort of more details or create any custom configuration. But what is happening under the hood is, you'll see here on the left-hand side, is that we do have 5 new solutions that are created in that new environment. And this is where those dependencies come into play. So do prepare for this. This will probably take about 10-15 minutes for you to create that environment, create that bot, and then go ahead and see that these dependencies get deployed when you go ahead and create that new bot. But otherwise, you're not going to be able to import your solution. It'll import, but it won't actually have all of the bot configuration. So save yourself some heartburn and just go ahead and make sure you take care of this before you actually go ahead and try these steps. Now, another thing that you might run into, especially if you have a flow as part of your bot. So you're going to go ahead, you're going to import your solution, and you're going to say, oh, great, my bot's here, it's working, until you go ahead and you try to run it. And then you're probably going to get a failure, much like this. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like that doesn't make sense. I still have my flow, I can click on it, I can go ahead and update the connections, because that is something that you're going to have to do, is update your connections. But what you also need to do is you need to make sure you turn your flow on. And so this is a default behavior of flows in solutions itself. So this isn't something that was sort of introduced as a result of Power Virtual Agents. It's one of those things where connections have to be established after a flow's been imported, but also it's a good feature. As an admin or a maker, you should want to control when you start to receive traffic into a flow, and as a result, you need to explicitly turn your flow on. But something not to forget when you're going through this experience. Now, here's some other considerations. The first one's really important. If you've used flows inside of solutions before, this is going to be familiar to you. You do have to create connections when you do import for the first time. Now, for this reason, and I know this is a bit of a contentious debate of whether or not you use managed or unmanaged solutions, But when you use managed solutions and you modify a component, you are now going to be making customization in an unmanaged layer. And so in my opinion, for now, until there's better support for solutions and connections inside of solutions itself, I recommend just exporting as unmanaged. And I know that's not the ideal situation. In a perfect world, you should always export as managed and import it. But when you have to make changes, you're bound. You're in a sort of a not ideal state to begin with. Here's the other thing: skills. As I mentioned before, you do need to ensure there's values inside of the environment variables that represent that skill. If you've set up end user authentication in your original environment, you need to go ahead now and replicate that in your new environment. So especially around like you want to integrate with Azure AD, you have to go ahead and set that up again. Same thing with customer service handoff. So maybe you've got an omni-channel escalation. That is an environmental configuration, not necessarily a bot configuration. So you need to go ahead and set that up as well. And then certainly if you have other channels like Facebook and whatnot, you need to go ahead and configure those in the new environment as well. Here's a link. Once again, I'll include it in the description of the show, and you can go ahead and get more information about these considerations. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get into a demo. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's run this demo. So first up, something to be aware of is the bot that you're in and the environment that you're in as well. And so that is what's going on here. We have our environment. In this case, this is my default environment, and I have a bot just called Udemy Learning. And so this bot's just quite simple. I have obviously the system topics and some of my own custom topics here, like the weather. And I can go ahead and run this bot by asking what is the weather today. And then I'm going to be prompted to provide the city. In this case, I'll provide Calgary. And we can see it's horrible. Yep, it's horrible weather in Calgary these days. But we know our bot works. We also know that I had previously gone ahead and upgraded this bot, so that is out of the way. I'm now in a position where I can go ahead and export and import my bot. So I can go ahead and just click on this link, and it's going to take me over to the Power Apps Solution Explorer experience. And so here I've got a previous demo. So now I can go ahead and create my solution. So let's go ahead, let's provide a solution, and we're going to just call it YouTube Demo June 2020. I need to provide a publisher. In this case, I've got a publisher already created and a version, and it's just going to default to version 1. So we can go ahead and just click create, and this will only take a moment, and now we have essentially a shell of our solution that doesn't contain anything. So that's our next step. Our next step is to go ahead and add existing components. And so what we're going to find is we can select chatbot. And then what it's going to do is it's going to surface all of the bots that exist inside of this environment. So I'm going to go ahead and just select Udemy Learning, and I will click add. We can now see all of the various components that make up our chatbot. So this includes topics. So this is good to know, like we have topics that are basically being managed individually and at a very granular level. We'll also go ahead and find we have a flow. And this is the flow that helps us go and retrieve the weather for a specific city. So this is cool. We've got a working solution. We now need to go ahead and export it. And we will go ahead and export, and we can simply click on next. And this is where we get into that decision of managed versus unmanaged. Since I'm using flow, I'm going to go with unmanaged. If I didn't have a flow involved, I would go ahead and use manage. And this is just because we have to touch connections, and you're going to see that shortly. So I'm going to click on export. This will just take a few moments, and we're going to have a zip file that's going to contain all of the definitions and the configurations for these components that exist inside of our solution. All right, so that just took probably 30 seconds or so to generate, and you can see we now have a zip file that is available in a folder. So we can go ahead and find that specific file. And we can just right mouse click, shift right mouse click, and then click on copy as path. And now what we need to do is we want to import this solution package into our new environment. From our environment picker, we're going to go ahead and select our second environment. Now, be aware, this environment does need to already include a chatbot. Otherwise, this is not going to work for us. And so what I had done before is I had created a chatbot in here that allows us to, just has the default configuration. So if I go ahead and select this environment, we can see that we do have an environment in place already. And so that's great. We're going to import this solution into this environment called 2206 Labs. And so we've selected 2206 Labs from our environment picker. We can now go ahead and click on import. All right, we now need to go ahead and find our file, so we can just paste our location in. Click on next, click on next, and click on import. Okay, we can now go ahead and publish the customizations, and now we can click on close. So if we just go ahead and refresh and then click on our solution, we will see all of our components here. Now let's flip over to our bot. Remember, make sure you're in the right environment, your new environment. Go ahead and click refresh, and then we're going to see our bot, which is great. So let's go ahead, let's click on topics, and then let's click on our weather topic and go to the authoring canvas. Now, we talked about this before with flow, so it's very important that you do go into your flow and just make a couple changes so that you are not caught off guard. Now, with this case, because I've imported things before and then I deleted it, I already have a connection in place. So I can just go ahead and select it. When you do this for the very first time, you're going to have to go ahead and click on add new connection. But either way, you're going to have to associate a connection with this specific flow. The other thing that you need to remember, and we covered this in the intro material, is we need to make sure this flow is on. And so we can turn it on, and then we'll be good to go. So now we can go in and go ahead and run this flow. And in this case, we're going to just say, what is the weather like? Now we're going to get prompted for a city. So we'll go ahead and we'll select Calgary, and you can see it's still cold, which sucks. But at least we've been able to go ahead and import our solution into our new environment. So that concludes this episode for today. I will be focusing on how we can now automate this through the use of Azure DevOps, but this will get you started and at least allows you to transport your bot from one environment to another environment. All right, take care. Thank you.